The Parenting with ADHD Blueprint, a complete ADHD parenting guide with strategies for behavior management, raising neurodivergent kids, and building a calmer, happier family by Jessica Rowan. Introduction. It was December 15, 1967, in a small town called Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The air was chilly, and the streets were filled with people getting ready for Christmas. The Silver Bridge, a narrow path of steel and concrete, stretched across the Ohio River. For 40 years, it had carried cars from one side to the other without much trouble. On this particular Friday, the bridge was packed. It was rush hour, and the line of cars moved slowly. There were families heading home with Christmas trees tied to their roofs. There were parents thinking about what to cook for dinner. There were kids in the back seats, probably wiggling around and asking if they were almost home. But the Silver Bridge was under a kind of stress that nobody could see. When it was built in 1928, the cars it carried were light. A Model T Ford weighed about as much as a large couch. By 1967, however, cars had changed. Huge semi-trucks heavy with cargo were now crossing that same bridge. The world had gotten heavier, faster, and more demanding. At 5:00 p.m., a tiny crack in one of the steel links finally gave way. In less than a minute, the entire bridge collapsed into the dark, icy water below. The engineers who looked at the wreckage later didn't say the bridge was bad. They didn't say the steel was lazy or difficult. They realized that the bridge simply wasn't built for the weight of the modern world. It was a 1920s structure trying to handle a 1960s load. It was carrying more than its design could ever support. If you are holding this book, you might feel like that bridge. The weight of the modern morning in Austin, Texas, Sarah Jenkins knows exactly what that overload feels like. It is 7:45 a.m. on a Tuesday, and her kitchen feels like a disaster zone. Sarah is 38 years old and very good at her job. During the day, she is a project manager for a big tech company. She knows how to handle budgets, deadlines, and grumpy bosses. She is the person everyone goes to when they need a plan. But at home, all of those skills seem to vanish. Right now, her 8-year-old son, Leo, is spinning in circles in the middle of the kitchen. He has one sock on, the other sock is nowhere to be found. "Leo, please put your shoe on," Sarah says. Her voice is still calm, but her hands are shaking slightly as she packs his lunch. Leo doesn't seem to hear her. He is making a buzzing sound and looking at a moth near the ceiling. "Did you know moths can see in the dark?" he asks. "Leo, shoes. Now," Sarah says, her voice getting sharper. In the corner, 5-year-old Maya starts to cry. Her toast is too pointy. She wanted it cut into squares, not triangles. The sound of Maya's crying and the sight of Leo's bare foot feel like a physical weight pressing down on Sarah's chest. "I can't do this," Sarah finally snaps. She doesn't mean to yell, but the words burst out of her. "Why is every single morning a battle? Why can't you just listen for 1 minute?" Leo stops spinning. He looks at his mom, and for a second, Sarah sees a flash of shame in his eyes. He isn't trying to be bad. He isn't trying to make her late. His brain is just focused on the moth and the buzzing and the feeling of the floor on his bare foot. Sarah catches her reflection in the glass of the microwave. She sees a woman with messy hair and a face twisted with anger. She doesn't recognize herself. This isn't the kind of mother she wanted to be. She wanted to be the mom who baked cookies and had a peaceful home. Instead, she feels like she is constantly walking on eggshells, waiting for the next explosion. She feels like she is failing. She feels like a bad parent because she can't even get her son to put on his shoes. You are not failing if Sarah's morning sounds familiar. I want you to take a deep breath. The struggle you are facing isn't because you are a bad parent. It isn't because your child is a difficult kid. Just like the Silver Bridge, your family is simply carrying a load that is heavier than what you were prepared for. Parenting a child with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is not the same as parenting a neurotypical child. You are not dealing with a behavior problem. You are dealing with a brain-based difference. For a long time, people thought ADHD was just about kids who couldn't sit still or kids who didn't want to follow the rules. In the 1990s, scientists started calling this time the decade of the brain. They used special tools to look inside the human head and see how it works. They found that the ADHD brain is built a little differently. It processes information, time, and emotions in its own unique way. Imagine trying to drive a car that has a Ferrari engine but bicycle brakes. That is what life feels like for a child with ADHD. They have all this energy and all these ideas, but the braking system in their brain, the part that helps them stop, think, and plan, isn't fully developed yet. When you try to use normal parenting tricks on an ADHD brain, they often fail. Sticker charts might work for 2 days and then get ignored. Timeouts might lead to bigger meltdowns instead of quiet thinking. Nagging only makes everyone frustrated. This book is about changing the way you look at the bridge. We aren't going to just tell you to try harder or be more strict. We are going to look at the blueprint of your child's brain and rebuild the structure of your home so it can actually hold the weight of your daily life. The Parent as a Neuro Guide. Most parenting books focus on how to fix the child. They give you lists of punishments and rewards to get the child to act normal. This book is different. We are going to move away from the idea of fixing and toward the idea of guiding. I want you to think of yourself as a neuro guide. A guide doesn't get mad at the mountain for being steep. A guide doesn't yell at the river for being cold. A guide understands the terrain and brings the right tools to help everyone get to the top safely. When you become a neuro guide, your whole world changes. You stop taking the meltdowns personally. You stop feeling guilty about the messy parts of your life. You start seeing your child's ADHD traits as raw materials that can be shaped into strengths. Sarah Jenkins is a great project manager because she knows how to look at a problem and find a system that works. She just hasn't learned the right systems for an ADHD brain yet. Throughout this book, we are going to follow Sarah as she tries these strategies. We will see her mistakes, her small wins, and the moment her home finally starts to feel peaceful again. The tools we will use to build this new family bridge, we are going to use 3 main pillars. Think of these as the blueprint for your new life. Connection. This is the most important part. If you don't have a strong relationship with your child, no amount of discipline will work. You will learn how to build a bridge of connection that can survive even the loudest arguments. Consistency. ADHD brains crave structure, even if they fight against it. We will learn how to create scaffolding, routines, and systems that act like external brains for our kids. Compassion. This isn't just for your child, it's for you. You cannot help your child if you are constantly running on empty. We will learn how to put on your oxygen mask first so you have the energy to lead. We will also look at some amazing people from history who can teach us how to handle these challenges. You will meet Dr. Virginia Upgar, a woman who changed how we look at newborn babies. She taught the world how to move from vague panic to careful assessment. She will show us how to look at our child's behavior like a scientist instead of a judge. You will hear about Thomas Edison. He was a child who was called addled and difficult by his teachers. His mother didn't believe the labels. She changed the environment to fit her son, and he ended up lighting up the entire world. And we will learn from Fred Rogers, the man who knew more about co-regulation than almost anyone else. He will show us how a calm, steady voice can stop a storm in its tracks. What you will become by the time you reach the end of this book, you won't be the same parent you are today. You will be able to stand in a chaotic kitchen at 7:45 a.m. and feel in control. Not because your child has become perfect, but because you have a toolkit that actually works. You will move from being a reactive parent, someone who is always putting out fires, to a proactive parent, someone who builds a home where fires are less likely to start. You will see your child thrive. You will see them move past labels like lazy or difficult and start to use their high energy and creativity for good. The shouting will decrease. The walking on eggshells will stop. And most importantly, you will rebuild the joy in your relationship. You will be able to enjoy your child again, rather than just managing them. The journey ahead, we have a lot of ground to cover. We are going to dive deep into the architecture of the brain. We will learn why your child's internal clock runs slow and why they seem to crave excitement like a thirsty person craves water. Then, we will talk about why traditional discipline feels like a battleground. We will look at why sticker charts fail and what you can do instead to get real cooperation. We will talk about co-regulation, the secret to staying calm when your child is losing it. We will learn how to build scaffolding so your child can finally remember to bring their backpack home from school. We will even look at how to talk to teachers and schools so your child gets the support they need without you having to become the problem parent. Sarah Jenkins is ready to start. She is tired of the yelling. She is tired of the shame. She is ready to stop being the angry woman in the microwave reflection and start being the guide her son needs. Your family bridge is under a lot of weight right now. It might feel like it is about to snap. But you are here, and you are looking for a better way. That is the first step toward building something stronger, more flexible, and more beautiful than you ever imagined. Let's begin. Chapter 1: Decoding the Architecture of Tea. In 1952, a woman named Virginia Upgar sat in a crowded room at a medical meeting in Atlantic City. She was a doctor who spent her days in the operating room, making sure patients stayed asleep and safe during surgery. She wasn't someone who liked the spotlight. She was much more comfortable playing her violin or building her own musical instruments in her spare time. But on this particular day, she was about to talk about something that would change how every person on Earth begins their life. Before Virginia stood up to speak, the world of newborn babies was a bit like a dark room where no one wanted to turn on the light. Back then, if a baby was born and didn't immediately start screaming or waving its arms, doctors often thought there was nothing they could do. They called these babies blue or stillborn. They would set them aside and focus on the mother. It wasn't because the doctors were mean. It was because they didn't have a plan. They saw a baby who wasn't doing and assumed that nature had simply decided the child wasn't meant to survive. Virginia Upgar thought that was wrong. She believed that vague panic was a terrible way to practice medicine. She wanted a way to look at a baby and know exactly what was happening within the first 60 seconds of its life outside the womb. She grabbed a piece of paper and wrote down 5 things: appearance, pulse, grimace, activity, and respiration. She told the doctors that instead of guessing or giving up, they should give every baby a score from 0 to 2 in each of those categories. If a baby had a low score, it didn't mean they were broken. It meant they needed help breathing or their heart needed a little boost. By turning a scary, confusing moment into a list of 5 simple things, she gave doctors a map. She moved them from, "he's just not a healthy baby," to, "he needs help with his breathing right now." This shift in thinking saved millions of lives. It turned out that many of those blue babies just needed a little extra support to get their systems running. Once they got that support, they grew up to be perfectly healthy. They weren't bad babies, they just had a slow start to their internal engines. Parenting a child with ADHD feels a lot like those doctors felt before 1952. You look at your child, and you see things that don't seem right. You see them struggle to follow a simple direction like put on your shoes. You see them explode in anger over a tiny problem. You feel that same vague panic. You might think, why can't they just behave? Why is every morning a battle? Am I doing something wrong? Just like the doctors in that Atlantic City meeting, we need to move away from the vague panic and the labels. We need to stop seeing bad behavior and start seeing brain architecture. When we understand how the ADHD brain is built, we stop being judges and start being guides. We stop asking, "What is wrong with you?" and start asking, "What part of your system needs a little extra support right now?" The view from the living room floor late at night, after the house finally went quiet, Sarah Jenkins sat on her living room floor. The carpet was covered in tiny plastic bricks. Her 8-year-old son, Leo, had been building a spaceship before a massive meltdown ended the night in tears and slammed doors. Sarah felt a heavy weight in her chest. She was a project manager at a big tech company. She was famous for her color-coded charts and her ability to keep a team of 50 people on schedule. But at home, she felt like she was failing at the most important job she had. She picked up a stray Lego and sighed. That morning, she had yelled. She had yelled because Leo was spinning in circles instead of putting on his socks. She had yelled because he forgot his lunchbox for the 3rd time that week. She had yelled because she felt like she was losing him. She felt like a bad mom, and she was starting to worry that Leo was a bad kid. Sarah opened a book she had bought earlier that day. She started reading about the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain right behind the forehead. She learned that this area is like the boss of the brain. It's responsible for planning, staying focused, and keeping emotions in check. In a child with ADHD, this part of the brain grows a bit differently. It's often about 3 years behind in development compared to other kids the same age. Sarah stopped reading and did the math in her head. Leo was 8. If his boss brain was 3 years behind, that meant his ability to control his impulses and organize his day was actually more like a 5-year-old's. The realization hit her like a physical wave. She had been asking an 8-year-old to do things, but the person answering the door was emotionally 5. She wouldn't scream at a 5-year-old for forgetting their lunch or getting distracted by a shiny toy. She would help them. She would guide them. For the first time in months, Sarah felt the weight in her chest lift just a little bit. It wasn't that Leo was being difficult on purpose. It wasn't that she was a failure as a parent. They were just working with a different set of blueprints. She realized she had been trying to drive a car that was missing its steering wheel, and she was mad at the car for not turning. It wasn't a moral problem, it was a mechanical one. The fuel and the engine. To understand why a child with ADHD acts the way they do, we have to look at two main things: the fuel and the boss. The fuel in our brain is a chemical called dopamine. Most people think of dopamine as the feel-good chemical, but it's actually the do-it chemical. When you think about doing a task, your brain releases a little bit of dopamine to give you the spark you need to start. For a typical brain, even a boring task like folding laundry or doing a math worksheet releases enough dopamine to get the engine running. In an ADHD brain, the dopamine taps are a little bit rusty. They don't let out enough fuel for the boring stuff. This is why your child can play video games for 4 hours without blinking, but can't spend 4 minutes brushing their teeth. The video game is a giant fire hose of dopamine. It provides all the fuel the brain needs. Brushing teeth is like a dry well. The brain literally feels thirsty for stimulation. It's not that they won't do the boring task, it's that their brain is screaming for fuel that the task isn't providing. Then there is the boss of the brain, which we call the executive functions. Think of these like a team of office workers sitting in that prefrontal cortex Sarah was reading about. In a typical brain, these workers are organized. One handles the working memory, holding onto a direction like go upstairs and get your shoes. Another handles inhibition, the ability to stop yourself from jumping off the couch. Another handles emotional control. In an ADHD brain, these workers are often taking a nap or they are all trying to talk at once. Working memory, this is like a mental sticky note. For most kids, that sticky note stays put. For a kid with ADHD, the glue is weak. By the time they get to the top of the stairs, the sticky note has fallen off. They stand in the hallway wondering why they went up there in the first place. Inhibition, this is the braking system. If a kid with ADHD sees a puddle, their brain says jump before the boss can say, wait, you're wearing your school shoes. The action happens before the thought can even form. Emotional control. This is the ability to turn down the volume on big feelings. When a typical child gets frustrated, they might huff and puff. When a child with ADHD gets frustrated, it's like someone ripped the volume knob off the stereo and turned it to 10. The boss isn't there to turn it back down. When you put these things together, a lack of startup fuel and a boss who is still learning the ropes, you get the behaviors that drive parents crazy. But just like Virginia Upgar's babies, these aren't signs of a bad child. They are signs of a system that needs a different kind of support. The 30% rule, one of the most important things any parent can understand about ADHD, is what experts call the 30% rule. This rule says that in the areas of life that require self-control and organization, a child with ADHD is usually about 30% behind their peers. This doesn't mean they aren't smart. In fact, many kids with ADHD are incredibly bright, creative, and fast thinkers. But being smart and being able to use that smartness are two different things. A 10-year-old with ADHD might be able to explain the physics of a black hole, but when it comes to remembering to bring his coat home from school, he is performing more like a 7-year-old. If you expect a 10-year-old to act 10, you're going to spend your whole day feeling frustrated. You will feel like they are disrespecting you or not trying. But if you look at that 10-year-old and realize that, in terms of his boss brain, he is actually 7, your whole perspective changes. You wouldn't leave a 7-year-old alone to manage a complex schedule. You would give them reminders. You would use pictures to help them remember. You would stay close and offer encouragement. When we use the 30% rule, we stop setting our kids up to fail by giving them 10-year-old expectations for a 7-year-old brain. This is where the oxygen mask first theme comes into play. On an airplane, the flight attendant always tells you to put on your own mask before helping others. Why? Because if you run out of air, you can't help anyone. Parenting a child with ADHD is exhausting. It requires more patience, more calm, and more boss brain energy from you than parenting a typical child does. If you are running on empty, if you're stressed, sleep-deprived, and angry, you won't have the oxygen needed to be your child's guide. You will react to their 5-year-old meltdown with a meltdown of your own. Learning the science of the ADHD brain is your first puff of oxygen. It lets you stop taking the behavior personally. It lets you see the blue baby who just needs help breathing, rather than the difficult child who is trying to ruin your morning. Moving from panic to process doctor, Virginia Upgar didn't just give the doctors a list. She gave them a new way to see. She taught them to look past the surface and check the vitals. As a parent of a child with ADHD, your job is to become a neuroguide. This means you are the person who understands the map of your child's brain better than anyone else. When you see a behavior that makes you want to yell, try to run your own version of the APGAR score. Ask yourself, is this a cannot or a will not? Most of the time, what looks like won't is actually can't because the boss brain is offline. Where is the fuel? Is the task so boring that their brain has no dopamine spark? How can we add a little spark to get them started? How old is the boss right now? If my child is acting like they are 3 years younger, am I giving them the right level of support? Is my own mask on? Am I calm enough to handle this, or do I need to take a breath first? Virginia Apgar once said, "Nobody, but nobody is going to stop breathing on me." She was a woman of action. She didn't just feel bad for the babies. She built a system to save them. She didn't care about being the first female professor at her university or making history. She cared about the person right in front of her. Your child is the person right in front of you. They aren't a set of symptoms or a list of problems to be fixed. They are a person with a brain that is built for a different kind of world. The world we live in, with its bells, its schedules, its quiet classrooms, and its sit-still rules, is often a very hard place for an ADHD brain to exist. By decoding the architecture of their brain, you are building a bridge. On one side of the bridge is the world and all its demands. On the other side is your child, with all their energy, creativity, and thirst for life. Your understanding is the foundation of that bridge. Without it, the bridge will collapse under the weight of vague panic and nagging. But with it, you can lead your child across, one small step at a time. The historical echo today, when a baby is born anywhere in the world, the very first thing that happens is the APGAR score. It is so common that most parents don't even realize it's happening. A nurse looks at the clock, looks at the baby, and gives a number. That number tells the whole medical team exactly what to do. Because of Virginia Apgar, vague panic has been replaced by systematic care. We are currently in a similar moment for ADHD. For a long time, children with these brains were labeled as lazy, daydreamers, or troublemakers. We lived in the vague panic era of parenting neurodivergent kids. We tried to punish the ADHD out of them, or we felt guilty that we couldn't make them act like everyone else. But the decade of the brain in the 1990s and the research that followed have given us our own APGAR score. We now know that ADHD is a structural and chemical reality. We know that the prefrontal cortex is smaller and slower to develop in these kids. We know that dopamine is the key to their motivation. When Sarah Jenkins sat on her floor that night, she was moving into the modern era. She was letting go of the old labels and looking at the vitals of her son's brain. She wasn't looking for a cure for Leo, because Leo wasn't a disease. She was looking for a way to support him so he could breathe in a world that wasn't built for him. As you move through this book, remember Virginia Apgar and her piece of paper. You don't need a medical degree to be a great parent to an ADHD child. You just need to stop the panic and start the process. You need to look at your child not as a problem to be solved, but as a person who needs a slightly different kind of oxygen. The architecture of the brain is just the starting point. It tells us why the bridge of the family might be feeling heavy or why it might be creaking under the pressure of daily life. In the next few chapters, we are going to look at how to reinforce that bridge, how to build better routines, and how to stay connected even when the boss brain is having a very bad day. You are no longer guessing. You are no longer in the dark. You have the blueprints, and you are ready to build. Chapter 2: Why does discipline feel like? In 1854, a 7-year-old boy named Thomas walked home from his school in Port Huron, Michigan, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. He had only been in formal classes for 3 months. His teacher, a man who believed in strict rules and the sting of a wooden cane, had finally run out of patience. The note was short and brutal. It claimed that Thomas was addled, a word used back then to describe someone whose mind was scrambled, confused, or simply broken. The teacher didn't know what to do with a boy who couldn't sit still, who asked too many questions, and whose mind seemed to be 1,000 miles away during rote memorization drills. In the mid-19th century, the fix for a child like Thomas was simple: more discipline, more shame, and more punishment. If the child didn't comply, they were cast aside. When Thomas handed that note to his mother, Nancy Edison, the trajectory of modern history hung in the balance. A different parent might have been embarrassed. They might have yelled at the boy for failing or grounded him until he promised to try harder. They might have accepted the teacher's label and spent the rest of their lives trying to force Thomas to fit into a mold that was never built for him. Nancy Edison did something different. She didn't see a broken child, she saw a broken system. She was a former teacher herself, and she understood a truth that many of us are still trying to grasp today. You cannot shame a child into behaving better. She looked at her son and decided to become his mentor instead of his judge. She pulled him out of school and told him, "You are not addled. You are brilliant, and we are going to find a way for you to learn that actually works for your brain." That single act of connection changed everything. Thomas Edison later said that his mother was the making of him because she was so true, so sure of me. She built a bridge of trust that allowed his hyper-focused, energetic, and often chaotic mind to thrive. Without that bridge, the light bulb, the phonograph, and the motion picture camera might never have existed. The myth of the level playing field, most of us were raised with a specific idea of what discipline looks like. We were taught that if a child does something wrong, there must be a consequence. If they don't finish their chores, they lose their phone. If they hit a sibling, they go to a timeout chair. We are told that these lessons will eventually sink in, teaching the child to make better choices next time. This approach is based on a myth, the belief that all children have the same ability to control their impulses, follow multi-step directions, and manage their emotions. We assume that if a child isn't doing what they are told, it is a problem of will. We think they are choosing to be difficult, or they are lazy, or they just need a tougher punishment to finally learn their lesson. For a child with ADHD, this level playing field doesn't exist. Their brain is physically wired differently. As we discussed in the previous chapter, their prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for doing what you know, is often lagging by about 30%. When we apply traditional discipline to an ADHD brain, we aren't teaching a lesson, we are punishing a disability. Imagine telling a child who needs glasses to squint harder and then taking away their dessert when they still can't read the chalkboard. We wouldn't do that because we understand that their eyes physically cannot focus. Yet, when a child with ADHD can't focus their attention or control their movements, we often take away their dessert, or their video games, or their playtime, as if that will magically fix their neurology. Sarah's Tuesday night battle. Sarah Jenkins sat at her kitchen table in Austin, the smell of burnt garlic bread still lingering in the air. Across from her, 8-year-old Leo was slumped in his chair. A crumpled math worksheet sat between them like a live grenade. "Leo, it's just 5 problems," Sarah said, her voice tight with a controlled anger that was anything but calm. "If you just finish these 5 problems, you can have your iPad for 30 minutes before bed. That's the deal." Leo didn't move. He was staring at a loose thread on his shirt, his fingers twisting it tighter and tighter. "I hate math, it's stupid," he muttered. "It's not stupid, it's your homework. And if you don't do it right now, I'm taking the iPad away for the whole week. Do you want that? Is that what you want?" Leo's head snapped up. His face was red and his eyes were welling with tears. "You always take everything away. I don't care about the iPad. I hate this house." He stood up so fast his chair clattered to the floor. He ran to his room and slammed the door so hard the pictures in the hallway rattled. Sarah put her head in her hands. She had tried the positive reward, the 30 minutes of iPad, and the firm punishment, losing it for a week. Neither worked. In fact, the harder she pushed, the faster Leo exploded. She felt like she was constantly at war with her own son, and she was losing. She felt like a failure as a parent, and she was terrified that Leo was becoming a bad kid. What Sarah didn't realize in that moment was that she was trying to drive a car with no gasoline. She was using discipline tools designed for a typical brain on a child whose bridge of connection had completely collapsed. Why traditional rewards and punishments often fail. To understand why Sarah's approach backfired, we have to look at the science of behaviorism. For decades, the gold standard of parenting was carrots and sticks. If you do something good, you get a sticker. If you do something bad, you lose a privilege. This works reasonably well for children who have high levels of dopamine and strong executive function. They can see a reward in the future, plan the steps to get there, and keep their emotions in check while they work. But for a child with ADHD, the reward system in the brain is underactive. They don't get the same hit of satisfaction from a sticker chart that other kids do. This leads to several common problems. The dopamine gap. An ADHD brain needs a huge amount of stimulation to feel rewarded. A small sticker, or the promise of a treat in 3 hours, isn't enough to overcome the physical pain of doing a boring task like math. Time blindness, because children with ADHD live in the now or the not now.